Great to have you as a part of the CFO club, and welcome to the club. So just having been, going through the details about you, you've had a very, very interesting career and, worked through some very large companies, including Capgemini and JLT. So one of the first questions when I was looking through, your details, and you've actually made an impact in almost all the organizations that you work. The profitability has gone up. You worked on restructuring. They have grown through M&A. So what has been your success mantra?
First of all, good afternoon, Preeta, and thanks for having me over. Pleasure to be talking to you. And through this medium, whatever little I can offer, I will try my best. To your question, right, and I just sort of go back to when Capgemini was being set up in India. Joined Capgemini sometime in 2001. Right? It was about a 200 member team, a short team then. And if I were to just reflect then, right, it was a startup. The experience that I got was, working on multiple fronts, not just finance, right? That was also the time when IT as an industry was evolving. So in that sense, it was not compartmentalized, right? It was not that you were just focusing on finance. You had a very broad brush to get involved into. And truly, I remain grateful to Capgemini and the leaders that I worked with for the kind of experience I had, right? We saw over a period of 10 years that I worked in Capgemini, the India business growing to almost 200 to about 35,000 people, right? And during that stint, I worked with the India business, the Asia Pacific business, and also the US business before coming back to India. When you ask me, what is the impact and what really led to the success? Trust me, it was entirely a passionate team driving, and I would say a young team looking or aspiring to grow that led to setting up Capgemini. And it's a great organization, employs over 150,000. I probably may have lost count, but it's a large organization, so to speak. The 2-3 things that I can just cite, right? One was when we were setting up India early on. I think it was my passion to learn the business more than just staying within the finance function, so to speak. So I spent a lot of time with sales and business, in commercials, understood the delivery, recruitment, so all facets of the business, right? And which is why I always feel that any aspiring finance professional should not just curtail within the domain of a finance function, but try to kind of find the breadth of the business, right, and understand what impact he or she as a finance professional can cause. The second experience I would cite at Capgemini was when I got involved with the US business. We were going through a massive restructuring exercise in 2005, and I was chosen to be based out of Dallas, right? At that point, I was the controller of the South region of US business. The entire US business was going under a restructuring, right? And it involved selling off a part of business and then looking at how to restructure. Over the course of 2 years, short of 2 years, as a team, we drove US business from, I would call, a loss-making to a profit-making business. I mean, it was precisely about 18 to 20 months. And again, that experience taught me that, you can look at so many areas of the business, right? And then where do you cut costs? Where do you invest? Which are the streams of business that likely will grow? How do you start to look at funding those? How do you create governance? All that became very relevant, and of course, a great learning experience when I was in US working for Capgemini. As I was involved in India business and also in Capgemini business, I got the opportunity to play a strategic role in Capgemini, which is when I came back from US into India and implemented a new model. It was actually, again, a strategic initiative. So while Capgemini was always being, the India business was looked upon as a global delivery center to other strategic business units of Capgemini. Sometime in 2007, the need was, can you really bring all the businesses together, right? So it's no more India and US or Europe for that matter. It's the entire US plus India or Europe plus India, right? And then we came up with the model which included all the business leaders, including US and India, to come together and think a new model whereby it's really revenue to the client and cost, which included both US and India put together. That model led to a good success, which also led to offshoring propelling in a big way, right? Because it was no more that the US business were incentivized for their revenue and profitability, and India business was incentivized for their revenue and profitability. It was more holistic. So that led to offshore business gaining a lot more prominence and also becoming a strategic way of how Capgemini could grow business and also improve their profitability. So these are the two things, I just wanted to cite where I felt it was a great learning. Plus, I could also have an impact onto the organization.
So Rajiv, just looking through, what you've added, your growth story and what you've done, and also looking through some of the comments from some of your colleagues in LinkedIn, I see that you're also an excellent people leader. And taking from that, I just wanted to add, looking at the pandemic situation that's happening around us today, right? How have you managed it in terms of people and growth, right? And how has it impacted the business per se? And especially now with the second wave in some ways being worse than the first wave. So how have you managed and what are your thoughts on that?
So, first of all, right, this pandemic has not been easy for any of the companies, right? It's a black swan event, right? Unprecedented. We are still to recover. If I look at L&T Technology Services, Q1, we are an engineering services company. And, we are actually amongst the top engineering services company in India, a pure play Indian engineering services company, I would say. We saw, of course, our Q1 revenues coming down post the pandemic breakout. It was difficult. Customers, did resort to scaling back their spend. Discretionary spend did come down. No new capex were being invested. So it did take a toll on the business. Now, we clearly saw some of our segments like oil and gas, aerospace getting impacted more than the other segments, right? So Q1, to put it in context, we saw almost 12% plus decline in revenues, and that also led to a significant impact on profitability. But since then, right, we've been back in terms of growth, and as of now, if I were to talk about Q4, we're back both on revenue and profitability to pre-COVID levels. Now, to your point, right, this pandemic situation not being easy on anyone, employees, and as you conduct business, it's been difficult, right, for employees. So the first and foremost thing was for us to think through how do we enable work from home. And, there I will give credit to the entire organization because the leadership came together to see what could be done, right? And you started to look at various dimensions. One, from a customer standpoint, how do you ensure that the quality of delivery is not getting impacted, right? Second, from an employee standpoint, how do you ensure that, you've enabled them for working from home? And also you're sort of having to take care of them while the pandemic is going on, right? And I'm talking about last year, and I will try to fast forward as to how we've seen this after second wave of COVID. So a lot of learning last year, right? Because none of the businesses have seen this quantum of work from home. Almost 98% of the employees were unable to work from home. But glad to share that, keeping, I would say, customers and employees on mind, we were able to ensure quality of delivery to our customers. In fact, our quality levels did go up. And to a very large, I would say, extent, we were able to give comfort to the employees, right, in terms of enabling them to work from home. Just to cite an example, being an engineering services company, many of our employees work from labs, right? And these are labs that are created for the customers in which different solutions are being offered. We even went to the extent of having those labs moved into employees' homes. And there I would say the entire organization came together to enable how you could shift these labs into the employees' residences. Right? Of course, as you got through the year, by middle of the year, you saw the number of counts coming down. We were also a company that enabled employees to come back to office. almost about 35% plus staff came back to office, right? And there as well, I would give credit to our HR team and administration team because they did a wonderful job comforting the employees, right? And we had some policies rolled out to ensure that the employees could, there was a fungibility created. Now, where we were sort of progressing was that over a period of time, we would see that fungibility, and plus at any point in time, we would see almost 60 to 70% of our employees at any given point in time work from office. Now, if you really fast forward to March of this year, little did you realize that, it's going to be another COVID-2 breakout, and a breakout to such intensity. I must say this was almost 1st of April, and none of us expected the intensity with which it came. It did surprise us, but the learning that we had from last year enabled us to get prepared quickly. In fact, there's a business continuity team that worked seamlessly, right, to again have all the employees get enabled working from home. There were a lot of programs that we put over the last couple of months to ensure that health and safety of the employees are taken care of, right? So I would talk about anytime doc, vaccination drive, quarantine care facility. We even had short-term COVID measures wherever employees needed, right, in terms of financial assistance. And a program called One Touch program, wherein every leader reached out to a set of employees just to understand, are they doing well? Is their family doing well? So that sort of approach, ensured that we were able to take care. We are an organization of almost 17,000 plus employees, right? And it's not easy to reach to that magnitude of employees, but through these measures, we were largely able to address the welfare of our employees as well. Even from a customer standpoint, I think post the COVID-2 breakout, we were able to involve the customers in most of these decisions that were being taken. And that also led to the comfort. And it's all I would add to is that engineering services, unlike if you were to look at any services organization, the customers in engineering services that are not that open for remote working, right? Because there's a lot of confidentiality, IP involved. And during this COVID wave, we were able to give comfort to the customer that the confidentiality or their IP, all of that would be managed well. And today we stand to be in a position where almost 98% plus employees are working from home.
Wow, that's really great to hear, what you've done. And it's not easy, as you said, rightly said, with 17,000 people stationed everywhere. So just, taking this discussion forward, you did mention that, being an engineering services company, right? What I also read that some of the major sectors that you're involved in, transportation, telecom, high-tech, medical devices, etc. So how do you see the impact across these 5 sectors, and how do you see the future, like let's say in the next 1.5 year, where do you see these different sectors, performing?
So I'll split this in 2 parts, right? Where did we see the maximum impact coming and where do we see going forward growth? And I'll also probably give a flavor of how do we look at ER&D as an industry and the outlook, right? So the segments that got most impacted were aerospace and oil and gas, right? And this is sub-segments of transportation and plant engineering. If I were to look at Q1 of last year, across all segments, we saw different revenue. But then we saw growth coming back in most of the segments, but for aerospace and oil and gas, right? It took a little time for them to recover. Now, if you look at ER&D as an industry, last year, I would say it declined. And if I were to talk about in terms of an outlook, right? Globally ER&D, if I look at, it's about a $1.5 trillion economy, right? Or rather industry across the globe. Looking forward, it's estimated in 2023 to be at $1.9 trillion. That's going to be a CAGR of almost 9%. And of that, digital engineering, which is going to grow the fastest, will likely grow at a CAGR of 19% and touch almost sort of $1 trillion by 2023, right? So there's an immense opportunity that we see in the R&D industry coming forward. And in those segments, if I were to touch, right, for instance, transportation, today areas like connected cars, electric vehicles, defense, these are going to be areas where we will likely see growth coming in transportation. If I were to look at telecom, high tech, 5G, OTT, again in the media segment, cloudification of products and systems, these are going to be areas, even cyber security in telecom and high tech are going to be areas where we are going to see growth come. In the third segment, which is industrial products, sustainability, IoT, enablement, AI, platform adoption, these are going to be the areas where industrial products will show good growth. The fourth segment, plant engineering, frugal manufacturing, sustenance engineering, repurposing of data and assets, these are going to be the areas where we'll see growth in plant engineering. And the last segment, which is medical, we see AI for radiology, we see touchless operations and telehealth solutions. These are going to be the areas where we will likely see growth, right? So across all the 5 segments, right, and I touched upon the broad global ER&D industry, and I also dialed down to these 5 segments, right? I mean, the outlook is positive, and we certainly remain optimistic that we'll see growth in all the 5 segments that we operate in.
Looking at the current situation now, what do you think are the top 3 risks in a business like yours?
It's an interesting one, Preeta, right? Because as any leader, one has to anticipate the risk and where will they come from and how do you mitigate and address them. First and foremost, there still is high uncertainty around the global outlook. We are not out of the woods. For instance, in India, COVID wave 2 is now settling, right? The number of cases are coming down. But as we speak, there's suddenly a Delta 2 variant that's emerging, right? And we've got to be prepared, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that we still need to see over the course of next 6 to 12 months how it all emerges. What is the resilience of the vaccine to be able to address different COVID variants is going to be important, right? Either we address the pandemic and it come to an end, or it will prolong. It's something to watch for. Within this, in terms of the high uncertainty, is the effectiveness of the policy actions that various governments across the world are rolling out, right? I mean, one is supposed to roll out different stimuluses, but how do you ensure effectiveness of those policy actions is something to watch out for. The third, within the high uncertainty I would talk about is how will the financial conditions, including commodity prices, right? How will all this settle, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and variability that you may likely see over the course of next maybe 1 to 3 years. Second, within our business, attracting talent and managing attrition is going to be a risk that we'll have to continually watch out for. Because if you look at companies in the R&D space, right, they are all looking for same skills to service the growth in demand. What I also feel that industry bodies, for example, a NASSCOM, will have to probably sit with industry leaders and arrive at some consensus, right? Otherwise, it will drive cost of hiring and also employee cost higher, right? So it's detrimental to the business. That's the second risk I'll call out. The third is, we would need continued support from government on benefits that get provided to R&D companies. For instance, there's a scheme called Service Export Incentive Scheme, which is allowed to R&D companies for R&D work that's done. Because of the pandemic, the government has still not notified this scheme for FY 19-20. Right? We are in FY 21 now. So we continue to seek support from government and remain watchful, right? How will government take the next steps and how will they continue these schemes in the new foreign trade policy? So these are the 3 risks I would call out, Preeta.
Okay. So do you see any kind of newer opportunities coming up because of pandemic? Like you've done something which is very innovative, like you mentioned about taking labs to people's home. Not an easy thing to do, but you've achieved that. And I think that is a result of the new way the entire environment is around us. So what kind of newer opportunities do you see?
Again, an interesting question, Peter. I mean, I see there are some structural shifts that are happening in the R&D industry. To call out a few, with technology integration in R&D, of course, the new product development process has seen a shift, right, from mechanical engineering to more embedded engineering, and this has led to expansion in markets. And when you look at ER&D companies, it presents an opportunity for us to get involved in this new product development process, which is where I talk about the whole digital engineering opportunity that is now emerging for ER&D companies. The second I would talk about is that today companies or our clients are increasingly giving access to end-to-end product development, which means there is more upward mobility in the value chain for ER&D companies, right? This is unlike what we've seen as a phenomena over the course of last decade, where you sort of worked at the middle to the bottom layer of the value chain. But slowly you're seeing us getting involved in the top end of the value chain as well now. The third opportunity I see is the talent in ER&D space is in short supply, right? So almost 60% of the spend around ER&D happens in US, Europe and Japan, but only 20% of the engineering resources come from these geographies, which is where India has a great opportunity. Almost about 1.5 million engineering students graduate every year, right? And that presents a great opportunity for ER&D companies to continue to provide service to their clients. So these are a few opportunities that I call as structural shifts in the ER&D services area. As I said, digital engineering is going to be a focus area, and with growing requirements around user experience, personalization, greater adoption of platform and cloud, and also consolidation to build full stack capabilities, right? These are areas where I think ER&D companies see a major opportunity going forward.
So, you spoke about digital engineering, and taking off slightly on a tangent from there is that, would you call yourself a true digital CFO? And what kind of technology related innovations have you driven within the organizations?
So to step back, right? I mean, from at least the companies that have been involved in the past, I've always looked at adoption of technology as a means to be able to, provide value to the business, right? So if I were to go back to, let's say, my Capgemini days, at that point in time, we used to use analytics for a rolling P&L forecast, right? And that was clearly more of a decision support that was being provided. In terms of sales and pipeline management, CRM was another application we were using then. Oracle Financial to support the whole timesheet to the project management. If I were to look at my JLT experience, I'm just citing a few. We tried robotics. Of course, we failed initially. This was as early as 2014, 2015. But using of, consolidation and reporting of financials was another area where we automated. At Birlasoft, I kick-started a program around finance transformation, looking at the order to cash, procure to pay, and report to record cycle. At LTTS, I would just cite because many of these are already in place and we're continuing to upgrade them. For instance, we use SAP for project management and financial management, and we will upgrade to SAP HANA in the near future. Of course, we use SAP Concur for expense management, we use ClickSense for reporting analytics, and we're looking at initiatives going forward, for instance, financial consolidation or contract management tools. So these are some of the initiatives that I talk about in terms of the digitalization that I have used in the finance function.
So great, just taking that step, a step forward, looking at pure data and analytics. I think that's very important for any kind of decision making. So I wanted, Rajiv, some examples from you. One is, how have you managed use data and analytics to manage costs, as the CFO? And on the other hand, how have you used data and analytics again for sales acquisition, growing the business? So you can give me some, some insights from that part.
Sure. So I talked about ClickSense, right? We use that for the purpose of data analytics. A lot of our decision support reports are coming from using ClickSense. And that essentially, I mean, when I were to talk about, forecast, or if I were to talk about cost, or for instance, spend management, right? I mean, the whole, I would say the 9 yards of the P&L, right? I mean, we use analytics to understand where is the opportunity and where is that we need to, look at optimization. In terms of, let's say sales or pipeline management, we use SAP C4C, right? And that we've been using for a few years now to be able to understand, right, what is the quantum of pipeline, in which areas, what are the trending that's coming about, and where is that we are investing, and where is that we are seeing results as a result of our investment.
Thanks, Rajiv. Just one last question to you. As I mentioned in the beginning, you've been a very impactful CFO. So what would be your advice to the emerging CFOs who are listening to us?
Preeta, I'm absolutely humbled when you say impactful CFO. I let the people that I worked along with judge for it. But as I would say, right, I mean, using almost 25 years of my experience in the corporate world, a few pointers that I could leave for my finance professionals or colleagues or aspiring CFOs. One, to look beyond accounting, right? Get involved in making business decisions. And here I use my experience at Capgemini and JLT, where I was majorly involved on the business side, right? And that's what allowed me to grow as opposed to just looking at from an accounting standpoint. The other I would talk about is creating value, right? I mean, pick up challenging assignments. I mean, if you don't take risks, you are not going to grow, right? And it's not about numbers, but it's about how do you translate those numbers and where do you create the value, right? So it's really about picking up those challenging assignments. You will often find them, right? And being a finance professional does not limit you to take up those opportunities. I mean, reach out and grasp those opportunities, or rather I would say just, grab them and then deliver, because even if you're successful or you're short of success, the learning is going to be immense, right? That will help you in terms of your growth. The third would be measure outcomes and not processes. Often you get caught in the process and you lose sight of the outcomes. I think as finance professionals, we need to be more focused on what are the outcomes and what are the enablers to drive those outcomes, and not just get caught up on the process side of it. A few more to add, right? Adopting technology. In today's day and age, it fascinates how technology can fast forward a lot of what you're doing. Easier said than done. I mean, we all are at different maturity levels of automation in our organization. But if you were to look at 5 years down the line, robotics, AI, blockchain, all these will be technologies that you will work with, right? So you need to experiment. You need to fail fast to understand, okay, does this work? Does this not work? And what do you need to do so that it can help you in managing your business? Last of all, to be the change agent, right? It's often easy to say no, but there's always a window of opportunity where you can see that, okay, you'll be able to walk the line, taking the risk and being the change agent. So these are the few messages, I would leave for my finance colleagues and also for aspiring CFOs.
Thank you again, Rajiv. Thank you so much for your time today and being here with us for this talk. Thank you.
Pleasure, Preeta. Thank you so much.